All right, so can we start, like, tell us about, you grew up in Omaha?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. The youngest of 6 kids, very Catholic family.
Same.
You're Catholic from Omaha?
Not from Omaha, just the Catholic part.
There's really not from a musical family at all. Almost decidedly not.
Really?
There's just my grandmother. One of my grandmothers who I grew up with was who helped raise me. She played organ.
Oh wow. In the church?
That's about
or
it.
She just played.
She just played.
Oh,
We had one in the basement. So that was kind of the first instrument, but we also had I think just because in the 70s it was hip to folk and rock and roll in general was hip. So we had a couple of terrible acoustic guitars in the house that I think were gifted to my oldest sisters when they were maybe teenagers. But I got real excited about it, so I started just teaching myself how to play on one of those just awful guitars. It was impossible to play.
Was it just always out of tune? And
It's hard to keep it in tune. Mostly it was just the action on it. It was so terrible that it was really, really difficult to
push the strings
to
down.
actually make chords. Yeah.
Sounds like the toy guitars that our kids have.
Yeah, it might not have been so unlike them. I remember one time I was learning like the Boxer or something of Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah.
And my oldest sister came in and asked what I was doing, and the implication was, like, are you making noise? Like, you're just making noises.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't even, because you could hardly even push the
Chords
I could hardly
down.
make a bar chord.
Yeah.
So it just kind of sounded like I was scraping cardboard a lot,
Did that influence your family to finally get you like a cool guitar that actually worked, you think?
Yeah, because I showed enough initiative, even just like learning chords on this terrible guitar, and that I, truly wanted a playable guitar.
Yeah.
This was around, I guess, 12, 13 years old or so. And so I think it was maybe for Christmas that year, my oldest sister actually had started dating Rick, who turned out they ended up marrying, and Rick's still a good friend of mine, good brother-in-law of mine today. But he's a musician.
Okay.
So so my parents, I think, sent him to a pawn shop, and he actually picked out a very decent Epiphone acoustic guitar.
Wow.
That I still have today. That
Really?
it's not, for years it was my primary songwriting guitar. It's just been so long that I write on some other stuff too, but I still play it and write on it every now and then.
Do you track with it at all, like your albums?
No, I don't, and it's not that it's not really trackable. I just have better guitars, so I don't know like why I would, it's just,
I didn't. Yeah, because like I don't know. I was thinking like Billy Joe from Green Day had that one guitar with the BJ on it, and he recorded like records with it, and it was the guitar that his dad bought him when he was like 10. So I didn't know if he was like you wanted to use it just because
it might
was
be
special,
that might just
or?
be a better guitar.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it really is a nice guitar, and it's like very worth like holding on to, especially
Sure.
since it's my first guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had other guitars back in those days that I hated. That I tried buying myself. I had this like terrible Ovation I hated, and just sold it. So there are. I used to have a Fender Bullet.
Oh, really?
A Squire Bullet. That was just kind of terrible. That I wish I had now still. That was my first electric that I bought.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
But it was terrible. So this is actually a good guitar. But yeah, I don't know. I have this really nice like 63 like Gibson LG1.
Oh, wow.
I just don't want to, like, if I'm ever recording acoustic, I would just
use that.
Yeah,
right. That makes sense. So you started playing guitar. When did you start playing with people? Like, was that later?
Well, so Matt McGinn, who's plays bass in Cursive. We grew up on the same block.
Oh, wow.
With each other. We've actually our history is that we don't actually know when we started being friends, but there's a recorded photo of us. I mean, there's a photo of us on a hobby horse together at 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
So really, I think that we were just infants that were like laid next to each other because
Sure.
our parents were friends.
Yeah.
So we really truly are brothers in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So around that age of 13 or whatever, I was getting really excited about guitar and was working on it on my own a lot, just like in my, it's not really a joint. You can't sit around and like learn guitar together necessarily.
Sure,
if you only
yeah.
have one guitar, but kind of got decently enough at it that I started kind of showing Matt, like, this is great. Like, this is like, we could do
Start
this.
jamming
I should
together.
say even further back than this, we already, because we both were so into music, definitely was informing like our identity already, as far as, you know, we did like the Columbia House 12 cassettes.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
And, you know,
Get 12 for a penny.
yeah,
or
we got
whatever.
like the Cure and the Smiths,
Yes.
and like we were just finding
love
so much
those
music,
days, yeah.
you know. And so even in like junior high or like 6th grade, we started a band. Our first band was called The Semi-Conscious, and it was, we had a Casio SK1 keyboard, and we had, you know, maybe like spatulas that we played a pillow, like,
Oh, wow. That's really creative.
you know,
yeah.
just trying to like, basically daydreaming of being in a band, even though we didn't know how to play instruments. So yeah, then back to, I kind of was showing him like, wow, I'm like, you know, like, can really play like this guitar is like a thing that we could actually learn how to play.
Yeah.
And he'd probably speak for himself better, but I mean, I think he just kind of got excited about the idea as well, because we together had already been daydreaming of the idea of being so impassioned about music, about maybe playing it ourselves. So he was just like, that's really cool, and he decided to pick up bass. And I think there's a few, I think that in some ways, I think that one, I think it's just that was just what was naturally more interesting to him. Two, I think there's probably a little bit of rivalry of like, well, if you're learning guitar, I'm going to learn something different.
Sure, yeah.
You know. But then three, also it's like, but also then we have like 2/3 of a band.
Right, yeah. And a lot of time people don't want to play bass, at least in my experience.
I think that for him it was just something that always appealed to him anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just nice and convenient that since I was learning guitar, then it's like, okay, well, I'll pick up bass. And
Yeah.
he ended up being a very good bass player and really far surpassed me as far as his ability. But
Yeah.
that's okay.
So you guys started the band. What was the band called again?
Well, Semi-Conscious was our first
Semi-Conscious,
band.
yeah.
But then we,
started-
in high school, we started a band. Our first proper band was called March Hares.
Okay, that was the one I was thinking
And
of.
that, so, you know, we were young in high school, and really kind of the most prospects that we managed to find. And I think that this is where Omaha, Nebraska really plays a role in this, and maybe even Catholic school plays a role in this, is that the only older bands that we knew locally were bands that would play prom and homecoming and a field day, you know, and it'd be cover bands. So because there were some older, you know, seniors that were doing that, that seemed to be about the only outlet that we could have. So we were eager to just start learning covers.
Yeah.
So March Hares originally was a covers band. But I was pretty excited. I was already writing my own stuff.
Oh, wow.
And initially probably just only showing Matt and kind of being like, oh, it's kind of cool, don't you think?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
But we didn't really know where an outlet was for that, because you can't, that's not what people want at the homecoming, you know?
Right, yeah. They want to hear songs they know.
But regardless, we did start peppering those songs in just a little bit. Like maybe do maybe 2 or 3 originals.
Okay, yeah.
During a set of
Sprinkle them in a
covers.
little bit.
And but we're already pretty fairly business minded, and it's probably mostly Matt. He's like very much the business part of our relationship. Is that we you know, started booking homecomings and whatever bonfires
and
and
stuff.
yeah,
Okay.
and saving up that money, and we went to the studio and did our first cassette of originals.
Wow.
And then I think we're maybe 15 years old. I'm not really sure what the timeline was of that. But
Was that the record? Was that put out on the Lumberjack
so
album?
Lumberjack
or is that
was
later
not
in
even
life?
around yet.
Okay. So we're still
so this was still pretty early.
Okay.
But I will kind of attest to that first cassette being the first kind of snowball effect that I've kind of been stuck on ever since. Because to fit through the pinhole of being successful in music is like really ambitious.
Yeah.
I think that since we were from Omaha, it was such a wild novelty. It's like it's not as big of a novelty if a band of 15-year-olds are playing in L.A.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
A lot of them.
Millions of them.
But in Omaha, I think it was just such a peculiarity that that like a radio, that they weren't playing our hits, but like we were like, I had an interview like on public radio.
Oh, that's cool.
And then there was an article in the Omaha World Herald, like with a picture, like they're like, you need to take a photo for.
That must have been really cool.
Yeah, we were just like, this is crazy. But again, I think most of it was just about the novelty of like, do you see that these like little kids are so ambitious that they're writing their own songs and recording their own albums. But yeah, that I do think about that time period as like the first taste of like some kind of notoriety.
Sure, yeah.
And that I've kind of been more or less stuck on ever since. this like kind of like this curiosity of like, well, what can I do with this? It seems like people are interested. What?
Yeah. Were your parents pretty stoked that you're in like
surprised.
like in what was it, you said the paper and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I'm
pretty
sure
cool.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
them.
definitely.
But even at that point, though, I'm sure they saw it as any normal, rational parent would, which would be like, well, this is a pretty neat extracurricular.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Before you go to college and get a real job.
right. So how did you guys? So with that album, you just pooled your money together and went into a studio and recorded it,
or
or
you don't even need a lot. I mean, I don't remember the numbers, but I mean, you record maybe like 2 days. Some guy. I mean, it's like a guy, and this isn't to just be dismissive of home studios, but that's. Yeah. In Omaha, Nebraska, that's what it was. And it's actually a pretty nice basement studio, but it's very affordable. Yeah. And he kind of did. I think we literally, because what contacts do you have when you're a sophomore in high school or whatever? So
phone book.
So literally back then I think it was phone book or classifieds or something, and we're just like, well, here is a recording studio, and I think we called this
Let's
guy.
Call him up.
This guy probably just was like, yeah, like I can bilk you out of a little bit of money. And
sure.
I'm sure it was reasonable. Well, otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford it. So.
Little does he know you recorded like Cursive for the first time.
Yeah, so he just mixed it himself too. It was just a whole like, he just like, I'm sure he just had some number, and he's just like, yeah, for $400, we'll
I'll cut
knock
a record
this
for
out.
you. Yeah.
And then you do it on cassette.
Yeah.
And that's even affordable to this day.
So you record the cassette, and then were you playing out? Was there anywhere for you guys to play other than like the school dances
at that
and
point,
stuff?
No. At that point, no. But it wasn't too much longer. And time creeps when you're in high school.
Yeah,
you're a teenager.
Young.
So it probably wasn't any longer than a year later that we kind of were able to tap into playing some of the actual cool
like
venues, like the bars. And that was a complication because we're so young. So it's where the Howard Street Tavern would have to decide, like, okay, this band, there's like this little bit of buzz and interest about, and there's not a ton of local bands either, and,
right.
At least back then, and so kind of coming up with, I think we had to wait at the back of the bar.
Because you weren't
of
of
age.
age.
It was time for us to play, and then they like let us walk up the stage and play. It was something like that.
That's cool. That's really cool, though. And from there, is that when you started Slowdown Virginia?
Yeah, and actually, I think I probably have my timelines wrong. I bet you who knows? But March Hares maybe never even quite got out of playing the high school circuit and stuff like that. But I could be wrong about that.
Yeah,
it's really hard to remember. I think that whatever. It's all kind of blurs. March Hares and Slowdown Virginia were both high school bands.
Okay.
So yeah, then we got into Slowdown Virginia next, and not a lot of need to change up bands other than, again, as a teenager, you're changing so fast. We outgrew what we're doing in March Hares so quickly and wanted to do stuff that was a little edgier and more, our tastes were already,
changing.
Yeah, becoming like, getting a finer point to what we were interested in doing. So Slowdown Virginia is just a lot weirder and heavier. And I guess maybe the more important thing is that March Hares, we had a vocalist that is sadly since passed away.
Oh, wow.
But Slowdown was like the first time that I started singing.
Okay.
March Hares, we had a vocalist because I was like, I can't sing. There's this young man who had a good voice. But I kind of still can't sing, but that's kind of part of like what is indie rock.
You can
know?
sing.
You just, well, certainly not like, I don't consider myself a singer, but I just started, singing out of necessity.
Yeah. Was that scary to do that for the first time in front of your peers?
Well, it was kind of, I can assume that it was kind of scary because I didn't want to cast that kind of those assumptions of like, oh, I got this. I can sing. I can play guitar and write songs, and I can sing too.
Yeah.
It seems like kind of a little, and and it's kind of scared of narcissism, and to grow up in the Midwest, that's like something that there's conservatism that kind of like is a a rain cloud over everyone. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those all things were a little bit nervy to kind of be like, oh, okay, I got this. I'll be the front man now.
Yeah.
Is not an easy decision to make for somebody like any of us,
Right, yeah. And you guys are recording records in Slowdown, Virginia, right? And that's how you put out something on Lumberjack, so that's where Lumberjack came involved?
So Slowdown, Virginia, we did, so still in high school, and it kind of moves into like the earliest, like my first year of college or something like that. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of demo recording, or we didn't even call them demos. It was definitely like our best foot forward. Like, but we recorded a lot of music.
Okay.
We wrote a lot and we recorded a lot, and we ended up in that, it's going to be very familiar to most bands out there. We ended up in that, on that hamster wheel of recording and sending out to labels, sending out to anybody we could, just looking for any interest. And it's impossible, it's just so hard. And got, little bit of burgeoning interest here or there. So already that snowball is starting to like melt a little bit for me, because I'm like, I'm already hitting a wall.
Yeah, so you guys were putting together press kits and like just mailing them out to anybody and everybody.
About any label we could find. We'd have the books, to like, and just getting little to no traction. Mm-hmm. But we ended up with a great support group in Omaha, which was all the young people that ended up being Lumberjack Records, which then ended up being Saddle Creek.
Yeah.
So Slowdown Virginia was a really unpopular band in Omaha, except for this pocket of Saddle Creek of kids that just thought we were the shit. And so it was essentially, I don't want to get it wrong, but I think, Ted Stevens, who plays with Cursive now, and Justin Oberst and Connor Oberst, and a handful of other people that like borrowed money from friends like in the neighborhood and stuff to put out that Slowdown Virginia CD. Wow. Because they really believed in it that much. It was and that was kind of part of the earliest dreams of having our own label, which was very much, based off of our fascination with Discord Records and Merge Records. Just these, labels that put out our favorite music that seemed to be doing stuff that was supporting their own region. And we're like, and it's like, even when we're doing it, it still felt just playful, but it seemed like but it turned out, it did end up working out. Yeah. But nobody thinks that at the time. It's
sure.
And for us in Slowdown Virginia, it was just like, that's really great, because we could use help and use an outlet to try to actually, put a CD out. So. Yeah. Because
then, obviously Bright Eyes came out of that, and even The Faint came out of that same maybe pocket of people, I guess.
Yeah. So so then that's also when we were able to, I guess I jumped forward a little bit. I like talking about those days, because before, something I think is always important to note is that somewhere between seeing our elders playing covers, and then there was a turn in that. There's a shift where there was a whole other new world of like punk rock in Omaha proper that our eyes were opened to, and they started that, and that's where we really saw like these were punk bands that were writing only their own music.
Okay.
And that's actually probably a lot of what the pivot was to switch to Slowdown Virginia. Like, we don't need to do March Hares anymore. We can do Slowdown Virginia, and like, let's throw ourselves into the fray of all these,
other bands.
Let's start playing the FOEs and, and the halls, and 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 just try to be a part of that community. So that's a huge influence.
Yeah.
And that's really important. That's why the vitality of a local music scene is so important, and it's one of the main conversations I feel like I have when I tour around and talk to people in cities. It's just like, how is the music scene going? And 'cause if your music scene isn't moving, then it's not going to inspire the next generation to do it.
Yeah.
You know,
because was Bright Eyes, were they younger than you? Like Connor and them, are they younger than you guys, or were you just like more successful?
Yeah. So Connor, even though it's like we're all part of the same. The impression is that we're all kind of part of the same generation.
Sure.
When that was happening back in our as we were teenagers, Connor was actually a generation younger than us, because I grew up with his older brother Maddie.
Okay.
And Maddie played in March Hares.
Okay.
And so Connor was younger. I mean, what our age difference is 6. I think 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, like,
which isn't that much, but back then it's
right. It's
lifetime.
huge. Right. Yeah. It goes from you could be in high school senior to middle school.
Yeah.
It's quite a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. But so he started also writing at a very young age, and so he was like, I think 13 when he first did like his first like folk
stuff.
show.
Yeah.
And, but it wasn't, he kind of, even though he was so much younger, he still kind of fit in.
Yeah.
And his parents are really cool, and they allowed him and his brother Justin to kind of hang out at our horrible illicit parties that they shouldn't have hung out at. But we were really good about keeping them away from
keeping them safe
from from the drugs and alcohol. And,
yeah.
Just like, you guys are children, and even that's like from 19-year-olds. So we were like 19-year-olds being like, no, you can't,
Yeah, sure.
Like showing up with like a case of beer and be like, this isn't for, you can't have this.
Right.
Which is like, it'd be hilarious now to look back at like a 19-year-old acting like an adult. But.
Yeah.
In the Midwest, are you able to drink when you're 18?
No.
Because my dad was from the Midwest, but that
that was
long time
years
ago.
prior. Yeah.
No, we were still leaning on people with fake IDs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did Slowdown Virginia? Did you guys ever tour outside of Omaha, or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we tried. We would do Kansas City a little bit, but never had a ton of luck with that. There was a band kind of between either Slowdown Virginia, then moved on to Cursive, but also in there. I started doing Commander Venus with Connor Oberst.
Yeah.
And Rob Nansel, who ended up running Saddle Creek Records.
Oh, wow.
And that may have been the timeline gets shaky, but that might have been my initially my more ambitious touring.
Oh, okay. It was with them.
Commander Venus. We would go down to Florida and play. We played like Pensacola in Georgia.
Oh,
like we'd just get invited to these things or something. So that was cool. Yeah, so touring, we all kind of started dabbling with touring, and also Lullaby for the Working Class, which is Ted's band, was Ted's initial band with the Mogus brothers, AJ and Mike. And they started doing a little touring, and I do a little touring with them as well. I think that was all kind of my earliest touring before Cursive really started properly touring.
Okay. So you started Cursive in like 97-ish?
So I think we actually started in 95 when
95?
we first started putting out, like we got together and put out like a 7-inch, I think.
Oh, okay. So 95 you got together, and you decided just to take Slowdown Virginia, and then that's what created Cursive?
Yeah, and I kind of had to get talked into it at that point. I think because of what I felt was ultimately this defeatist attitude that I had about when we were talking about Slowdown Virginia. And it was really cool of Lumberjack Records to put that CD out and stuff, but I kind of recognized for what it was as well, which was this is
not
just like essentially a GoFundMe back then from the neighborhood to see our music, to have our music see the light of day, just because this new group of friends that we had believed in it, and that was great. But I was in college at that point. And I don't know, it just kind of the writing is on the wall as far as it's like this isn't this isn't really going to happen. And at that point, I don't think I ever considered that I would stop being a songwriter, because that's something I always believed in. But I was going to get more serious about actually
college.
Yeah, about finding a real career.
What were you going to college for?
English and literature. And
wow.
My goal was just to stay in that until I got some, became preferably like a professor versus just a teacher, was kind of what I would have done.
Perfect for you.
Because I love all of that.
You're great at writing lyrics and stuff.
That was the aspect of college that I loved, and I still love. So I remember it was Matt McGinn and Steven Peterson, who's also in Criteria now and was the first guitarist for Cursive, and also was in Slowdown Virginia. Slowdown Virginia had already stopped, and there's some handful of months that passed, and we met up, and they kind of convinced me. And the way they convinced me was just, it was simple enough. It was just like, what's the point? Like, you love doing it, we love doing it. What's the point of having to stop? Like, what does it mean? Why can't we just do it because it's fun?
Yeah.
But I agreed with, and they said, well, that's when I first started playing with Clint Schnase, who's the drummer, still the drummer for Cursive.
Yeah.
And so I agreed with them and decided to start it, but I didn't really start it, in my mind, I didn't really start it with the idea of we'll just be a fun thing to, get a six-pack on the weekends. They kind of helped talk me into probably one of the more important decisions in my life, which was, okay, I will give this another go with a new set of musicians, or at least, a different set of musicians, a new name, and a different approach. And that's the first time in my life where I took on where Slowdown Virginia was trying to tune it a little bit closer to our aesthetic than March Hares was. I recognized the flaws in what Slowdown Virginia was as well for me. And so then I was like, okay, with Cursive, this will be, from here on out, I only want to release stuff that I truly believe in. I don't really want to fuck around with bullshit music. Everything really has to count. And I will really give this another shot. And that would have really been the last shot. It would probably not. It probably wouldn't have been the last shot, because I think I'm just married to the whole process at this point. But that's the way it felt. And thankfully it ended up being that ended up being the push in the time in our life where things actually started clicking. And we went back to sending out our music out to labels, but this time, lo and behold, we actually got responses, and it just blew our mind. And it wasn't just us, it was just, that's kind of what is also what kind of was romantic and cool about the whole Saddle Creek scene back then, is that not only were we getting responses from the coasts, but Lullaby for the Working Class was getting responses.
Rad.
And Commander Venus was getting responses. And so it's like Connor and Ted and myself, we were all actually garnering attention from actual labels with actual funding. It was just a really weird and cool time.
That's awesome. But you didn't decide to sign with any of those labels, did you?
No, actually, initially we all went off our own directions.
Oh, really?
And
because I was under the impression that you guys only released stuff through Saddle Creek for
no. So that's almost correct. Instead, what happened is Cursive was recorded ultimately by Crank Records, which was a good fit for us at the time. That was Mineral, and Vitreous Humor. It was just a lot of the, I guess, quote unquote emo rock,
the early emo,
of the '90s. And that was a good fit for us. And we loved the label, so we were stoked
to be on it.
Lullaby for the Working Class found a great home at Bar None Records, which was Bar None was really pretty successful back then. At that time, I don't really remember their so well, but I think they put out one of the big They Might Be Giants records.
Oh, okay.
And just all kinds of stuff. And they were a New York label. And then Commander Venus was also picked up by New York label, which is a whole funny other podcast. Because that was we ended up on Grass Records, because that's when I was still with Commander Venus, and there's ultimately Connor's band, but I was a part of it. And we ended up on Grass Records, which, as they were getting picked up by what would end up being Wind Up Records, which is who are responsible for unleashing Creed and Evanescence onto the label. So that's the label we were on.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
So we all went off and did that for a couple years, and then came back and kind of made a real concerted effort, speaking with one another and being like, do we want to actually give this a go? Like, past the daydream of Lumberjack Records and kind of be like, we have our own label and it's fun, but really we know it's not sustainable. And then there was that moment in like the very late 90s when it was just like, should we do this? Can we all do this? And Bright Eyes actually had already started doing it. Okay. Bright Eyes always was on Saddle Creek.
Yeah.
But to understand that though as well, Bright Eyes was, it's funny to think of, but was the smallest act and the smallest conceptual idea of everything that we were doing, because Connor was also doing Commander Venus, which was his band, but he had like basically his bedroom tapes. That was Bright Eyes. Yeah. And so that was just released locally on Lumberjack / Saddle Creek. And of course that ended up being the one that,
the biggest,
that blew everything up.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time, it would seem very normal and natural that he would just, like, who was going to pick that up? So like they just, I don't know if that was really the attitude, but it was it was more appropriate to put out these these bedroom 4-track tapes on the home label.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess it was really more of a decision of like, well, Bright Eyes is doing it, and Bright Eyes already, by letting out the happiness, was getting more attention. Yeah. Not a lot, but some more. Yeah. And so then Cursive was like, yeah, we'll come back. And Lullaby was like, yeah, we'll come back. If I recall, Lullaby was more contractually bound to Bar None, but ultimately they were back in the fold, so to speak. And then the Faint. The stuff they were doing started becoming a little bit more viable, and then so they became a part of it.
Yeah,
as well.
And then they became huge as well too. With when you said you came back to Saddle Creek, was that when you put out the first full-length Cursive record? Was that Domestica?
The first full-length record is Such Blinding Stars for Starving Eyes, and that was on Crank. And,
that was a full-length.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then and then we did Storms of Early Summer, and that's when we had already returned. So we did that on Saddle Creek. Okay. Or Lumberjack at the time, maybe. Yeah. I don't think it was switched over yet. Okay. And then Domestica after that.
Mm-hmm. And when did you tour when you were on Crank Records? Were they the first label to put you guys on the road?
Yeah, that was the first time that we really did proper tours, and it's a good memories, and it was,
Well, do you remember the first tour you guys did? Like, was
I'm not sure if I'm remembering specifically the first one, but I remember those first few or whatever. Yeah. And, they resemble
a tour?
The tour the tour that we all have. Yeah. That most all of us have anyway, where we played in storage, like in a storage space at like a U-Haul storage with like 4 other like metal bands. Yeah. That's neat. To like a smattering of 12 or 15 kids, and just shows like that, and basements, and sometimes a venue that I remember being like after a show at a venue down in Pensacola, Handlebar, and it was 4 bands on tour, and there was $11 to split
between everybody,
between the 4 bands. Oh my gosh. But how it was like a sincere conversation, because it's like we all could use $2 or $3.
Oh, yeah, for
that was like, sure. And there's also it's also like there's a certain amount of just pride to it at that point too. Yeah. Just like, well, yeah. I'd rather get paid $3 than $0.
Right. Yeah, $3 more than you had before. Did you ever have any shows on those first tours where you'd get to the venue? Because we're talking pre-cell phones, and you'd show up there and they're like, "Wait, you're supposed to play tonight?" Were there any of those?
The way I often think about that and explain those stories is just that's like when we were touring back then, like last century, I mean, we could have been more professional and had to put together, and certainly tour managers knew how to do it back then.
Right.
Who were like the real tour managers, but we weren't even close to.
Yeah,
that.
just
we
doing
were just
what
kids
you loved.
doing
yeah.
it. So we would, use a map, an atlas, and we would take the right interstate to Atlanta or Chapel Hill or wherever you're going, and pull into the city, and go to like a gas station and to a payphone. And call, and it's such a pain in the ass because you call and it's just like a bartender.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Who are you? Where are you? I don't know." And it's not their responsibility, and they'd be annoyed, and kind of rightfully so.
Yeah.
And we were like, "Huh?" And then you maybe ask the gas station attendant if they've heard of this like venue or house that they've never, like
you should
like
be
I don't know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
And that's the way we did it practically every night. It seemed like.
That's cool. I was gonna say, so when this album came out, The Ugly Organ, this was kind of like more of the. This is like when things started to really cross over, right? This was like when you guys really kind of blew up.
Yeah, Domestica was the first record where I started. Domestica, then plus the first Good Life record I did, or kind of like the same year, and that's when I kind of started touring so much that I quit waiting tables. It certainly wasn't made of money, but it was almost more of the necessity of that. I toured too much to hold down a job. But could still manage to pay rent with living with 3 other guys, like in a dude house, where rent was like $200 a month.
Yeah.
But yeah, Domestica was the first time that we actually recognize like actual like attention, or like getting actual feedback, and that was really shocking. So Ugly Organ actually to us is in a way a follow-up to the first time that we ever experienced any concept of accolade, or actually like the first time being aware that there's any fan base that is really kind of like listening to this. I mean, we did have that somewhat for the first 2 albums. I guess I shouldn't shortchange them, but Domestica was kind of like was our first like next level
album
curiosity of like, wow, like we're being reviewed in like real publications, and like selling out small venues, and all this like really weird shit that was like totally foreign to us. So we followed up with Ugly Organ, and some of the album is really about that experience. And then Ugly Organ was just ended up being like this really weird thing that I still feel like I don't know if I ever like fully processed it.
Really, yeah.
Like I remember the way I remember process. I guess the way I still process it. I think I understand it better now. But I would, we were touring incessantly because we were always being invited to like do this or that kind of like pretty like cool tour, and I running into friends in all the cities. I kept hearing this like refrain of like, God, I can't look, like you guys are everywhere right now. I can't look anywhere without seeing you, and I could never quite understand what that meant. I guess all I can really say is that maybe like when you're in the middle of it, it's like you can't see it from the outside looking in. And I think it helped all of us stay incredibly humble through the whole thing, because we didn't really recognize the impact that it was having. And now looking back now, I think I am looking from the outside looking into it, and it's like, oh, holy shit, that album like really like tore it up that year. And I think it's probably better that I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, I remember when I got it the first time, and just when the Recluse, and I'm like, oh my God, like this album is so rad and different than anything I had ever heard. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this, because this is the coolest thing ever. You guys put out this it's like a booklet of all of the Ugly Organ tour. Like, what made you guys decide to do this?
I mean, it's kind of just like a victory lap for an album like that, I think, and it's been long enough now that, I mean, even me looking at it right now, there's like certainly a nostalgia too. We look a hell of a lot younger.
Yeah,
you know?
like I mean, is this the like? I mean, that's in the New York Times mag. I mean, there's some really cool stuff in here. Tara and I were going through it, and a couple questions I wanted to see if you'd be willing to answer is like, this is Coors here in San Diego, I would assume, right? With the Cure?
We had a Coors.
We had a Coors amphitheater. I don't know if it's the same one, but the Cure have played there. And I didn't know you guys played. And then look at the show. It was at 4:30.
I don't remember if we did. I don't remember. So we did like the West Coast with the Cure, and I just don't remember if we got down to San Diego or not. We played. We played LA.
Maybe it was a different Coors. That was the first thing I thought of. I was like, whoa. But
that
do
could
you
very
remember?
well be. I just apologize that I don't remember if we were in
it's
San
all
Diego.
good.
Close to the border. Coors is like right.
Yeah, it's right next to Mexico.
Okay.
Mexico
Well, I
from
almost wonder if there may have been a Coors Theater in Colorado.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because we did an amphitheater in Colorado.
Oh, okay.
So
you did a date, obviously, with the Cure. You did like a little stint with them.
That was a big highlight.
I can
of
imagine.
all of us, for sure. Yeah.
And now you were saying earlier that the Cure was some of the records you get from Columbia House, right?
Yeah. No, that's like that'll be a major touchstone in my life for sure. Is just having of all people to be some form of validation from Robert Smith.
I was gonna ask, did you get to have some pretty good conversations with him?
Very cool guy. And the last show we played of that tour was so it's Robert Smith and he's busy and he doesn't need to be bothered,
right.
you know. But he was such a gracious host the whole time. In the last show that we played with Sacramento, I remember seeing this kind of this black mass off to the right of me inside stage, and I was like, shit, man. I bet I know who that is. Yeah. And as I'm playing, I kind of like quickly like kind of take a peek, and I was like, fuck. Robert Smith is just hanging outside stage watching us play right now.
Oh my God.
It was pretty wild. He was a very kind.
That must have just been like a childhood dream come true, you know?
I mean,
it's
just very weird, but it was great.
That's awesome. And then you were talking about how much you guys were touring through the Ugly Organ, and I thought this was so cool.
I was like, all the dates are in here. Is that right?
Yeah. So you look through, and it's just like
go to San Diego a few times. Like
yeah. I mean, well, it's funny because I was looking. I saw you guys at this show, at the Scene. You guys played this venue called the Scene.
Okay.
It used to be in Claremont here in San Diego, and it closed down. But you had played there prior, so I couldn't remember if I saw you on the. It must have been the.
We figured it was after we graduated college.
Yeah, 03 or 04 tour. But yeah, this is so cool because it has every date you guys have played.
God. I should probably take a moment and look through all that.
Yeah,
it's a really
cool
thing you guys have together here. I just wanted to show it to you.
Yeah.
No, this is a good reminder that I should go back and look through these things.
It definitely shows like your background in like English because it's like it just reads beautifully. It tells a story.
And like these drawings. I mean, was that like? Do you remember who drew that?
Yeah, these are all me.
Oh, you did. Okay.
And these are all just like the initial. All the drawings are just all the first ideas that I was throwing around. Yeah.
And then there's this, which I think is really.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. And was this from? This is like the split.
Yeah, the split that we did with Eastern Youth.
Yeah, it's funny. I was gonna. There's one part on here. It says, just like it's like speed, lots of it. Tape, yes. Level, rock. Like it's just goofy stuff. I thought that was funny.
Outlining.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, that's awesome. So. You guys, what do you have like, is this the 9th record you've put out now?
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we were talking to Anthony from the band Bayside, and he was telling us like being a musician, I'm sure you feel the same way, is just like you never arrive. Like you're constantly working. Like you put it like Paul McCartney or something like that. Is that kind of how you feel like you're just going to keep writing and there's really no like end point to it all? You just see yourself. That's just kind of what you do.
Yeah, I think it's just it's a consistency and to it. I really enjoy writing under kind of different monikers because I can eventually feel burned out from one, so I can always move to another. The way that I live this kind of music life I don't know it any other way, but I really love the way that I do it is that there's always the next thing. So I don't know if there's ever, it seems like anytime that I'm out doing it on a touring cycle, it's great, and I'm promoting the stuff that I did last year, but I'm already in my head, I'm already next year.
Yeah.
I'm already like working on next year, and and that's, so it's always exciting. I feel, for me, and each record I do is the most exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
Record.
Is it because this one just came out? Right? I mean, at least on the vinyl.
October 11th, the day after my birthday.
But I think maybe you just put the vinyl out then a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Okay, so the album was out, and you're probably already writing or thinking. You said you're thinking forward. So are you just constantly writing, or how does that work?
I take breaks, but they're not very long, because I just want to get back to it.
Yeah. Do you set some time out of the day, or is it just kind of as it comes to you?
I'll have songwriting periods, and they're not very long actually, but it'll be maybe no longer than a month, maybe sometimes just a couple weeks, but and it's some of my favorite times of the year, and because it's just as I explain it to you, it's very it's so relaxing.
Yeah.
I just wake up and I know that all I have to do today is put shitty movies on the TV and just kind of absentmindedly play guitar in front of these terrible movies, and it's just so fun. And I'll spend hours to all day doing that, 5 days a week. In again, so maybe for a month, but I do, just for me, and I'm sure all the writers are different, but I recognize there's a point where you're just kind of pushing against, you're slamming your head against the wall and you're not really getting anywhere with it, and so that's why I stop. And I'll get away from it, generally I'll be away from it long enough that I'm so excited, and I can, at this point, I've been doing it for so long, I can kind of recognize when I'm like champing at the bit to like play guitar, which is a great feeling to have when you're 45 and you've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
Because I've gone through, and all of my songwriter friends, I think we go through these concerns of like, I don't think I can do it anymore. I don't think and I just never, I have those concerns kind of, I know that they're silly, but I love that I'm still always so excited. Not always, because I do. I get to a point where I have to stop writing, because it's like nothing productive is coming out, and you're expressing signs of disinterest. So you should go occupy your time with something else, and then you'll get real excited. You'll miss it, and you'll come back to it.
Cool.
The new record, I love Beans, and I always think about the apocalypse. So I was like, that is a cool song. I think about that all the time. I keep Spam and Vienna sausages and canned beans on hand, and water, always water. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, are these fictional ideas or like?
Yeah, I mean, I write a real blur of fiction and nonfiction, and then I kind of just keep it there, for like my own security and for the people around me, for their own their own security, not safety, but yeah, referencing that, I have my 2 suitcases that are filled with water and cans, canned foods that all have. I was like, I'm not gonna bring a can opener. I'll just have ones that pop open. And cat food and dog food.
Oh, yeah. I liked that one, and then I was wondering, like, I actually Googled if there was a paper company in Omaha, and I saw there was.
Yeah.
Did you work there? Or?
No, so that's definitely more fictitiously based. It's just kind of a story that I started. And kind of started playing around with.
Yeah, I liked it. I was picturing a guy that like is making boxes for Amazon and doesn't know like what's going to go in them, and then I was thinking about Omaha steaks. So my mind went a bunch of places listening to it. I like it.
I'm careful to, because I think it's so easy for listeners who are familiar with me to assume that that's about Omaha, and I'm careful to like express that it's. I want it to be there'd be a universality to it, that it's like it's about you.
Yeah.
It's about, as in, it's just about all of us in the way that we feel about maybe our hometown or the town you've moved to, or just whatever those worst times in your life where you feel like you're being like you can never leave and you feel like you're stuck. But then also recognizing that mostly that's just in our head, and it's maybe it's more of something that you need to get out. You need to figure out fix about yourself, you know.
Yeah,
I like it. I love the way you write.
Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant, seriously. Well, I guess our last question is, do you have any advice for aspiring artists?
I generally the advice that I go to the most is to try your hardest to, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. I think that we all basically have songs in our head, and the songs that are in our head are an amalgam of everything we've heard. And I think that there's even been studies that kind of more or less prove this.
Oh, wow.
I can't really cite them, but I don't know. It's real. Like if you only have a Beatles record and that's the only thing you have access to on your desert island, and you start writing music, it's not going to sound like Zappa. It's going to sound, you know, unless you are Frank Zappa,
Right.
in which case there are truly unique writers out there, and that's a special feat. But to do the best you can at figuring out just like what you're, to not emulate or copy, just whatever it is that's going on in your head, to try to track that, to try to get that down and have that be your music. And that's just a more complex way of saying, like, be true to yourself.
Right.
But the reason why I think that's so important is because that's what's gonna, I personally believe that that's what's gonna make you feel, that's where you'll find real fulfillment. And I don't think that, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's much fulfillment in personal fulfillment in kind of making your music a commodity and marketing yourself correctly in the way that you think you can get more fans and that can get, you know, like a higher profile. What do you do with that?
Right.
I just think that you can create yourself a job. And if you are not a real, I guess now I'll be harsh on people. If you're not a real musician, if you're not a real songwriter, but you want to like use those tools to make yourself a job, and if you're able to do that, and if you can live with yourself, then that's fine. It's a better job than being a CPA if you don't want to be a CPA. But at the same time, I find it very inauthentic, and there's like a real beauty in crafting art of any form.
Sure.
And if you're gonna not, you know, have it be the truest expression of yourself. Sorry for being so corny about it.
No, it's true.
Then it's like, I think it's kind of a waste.
Well, I think people can see right through it. If a lot of the time, they know if you're authentic or not. That's why the people that really open up and tell their story get the most, you know, reaction.
Yeah, and so authenticity that's the right word for it. And so the kind of bummer part of it is that, as far as the advice goes, is that it's like, just be your authentic self, and then just recognize that there's a high chance that people aren't going to respond to it, and accept that, and just be accepting of that. And it's just like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is that because if people aren't into what you do, it doesn't make you any less of a songwriter. It just means that people aren't into what you do. It doesn't mean that you can't keep playing. If you love writing songs, just keep writing songs. You're just going to need to continue a day job with it, and that's great too.
Right, yeah.
It's really not, if anything, you know, mingling money and career into music's really dangerous. So you might, you know, I have a lot of friends who find that they're better off with not, you know, monetizing music because it can spoil it.
Yeah.